She was a woman who had never joined a convent, never taken vows, never left her comfortable London house. And yet she spent 20 years reading every account of the mystic experience she could find, hundreds of them, across centuries, across continents, across faiths, and what she found was not chaos. What she found was a map. This is a summary of Mysticism by Evelyn Underhill, first published in 1911. If there is one book that treats the interior life with the rigor it deserves, not as poetry, not as religion, but as something that actually happens to human beings who follow a very specific path, this is that book. If you want a summary like this every week, subscribing takes one tap. Here is the ache at the center of this book. Most of us move through our lives acting on a version of reality that is, according to Underhill, radically incomplete. We take in the world through our senses, process it with our minds, and assume that what we get is what is there. The mystic tradition, from Plotinus in 3rd century Alexandria, to Meister Eckhart in medieval Cologne, to Teresa of Avila in 16th century Spain, says, "You are seeing a fraction of what is real, and the part you are missing is the most important part." The mystic is not someone who escapes reality. The mystic is someone who pushes further into it. Underhill's book moves in two large currents. First, a philosophical and psychological examination of what mystical experience actually is, clearing away the misconceptions, establishing the terms. Then, a careful tracing of the path itself, the sequence of interior states that mystics across all traditions seem to pass through on their way toward what she calls union with the Absolute. The first current of the book begins with a definition, and Underhill defends it with care. Mysticism is not a feeling. It is not enthusiasm, not vague spiritual warmth, not a beautiful experience at a sunset or the edge of the sea. She is particular about this, almost insistent. She defines mysticism as the direct experience of a reality that is both deeper and more real than the world of appearances, a reality she calls, without embarrassment, God. Not the God of doctrine, necessarily, not a deity with preferences and a list of violations, but something that is, in her phrasing, the one, the absolute, the living ground in which everything else exists. She draws a sharp line between the mystic and the magician, between the mystic and the occultist. The magician wants power over the invisible world. The mystic wants nothing except to surrender to it. That distinction shapes everything that follows. It tells you what the entire path is for and what it is not for. The practical takeaway from this opening section is quiet but important. You have probably encountered the word mysticism and dismissed it as irrational, as self-indulgent, as the intellectual equivalent of incense. Underhill is asking you to consider that the opposite is true. That mysticism is, if anything, more attentive to what is real than ordinary perception, precisely because it refuses to stop at the surface. She is not asking you to believe anything. She is asking you to look more carefully. The second current begins with an observation that has stayed with readers for over a century. Underhill notices that the autobiographies and letters of mystics who never met each other, who lived in different countries, spoke different languages, belonged to different faiths, describe remarkably similar interior experiences in remarkably similar sequences. She identifies 5 stages. She names them the awakening of the self, the purgation of the self, the illumination of the self, the dark night of the soul, and union. They are not neat divisions. They bleed into each other. A person can circle back, but the sequence, she argues, is real. The awakening is the first crack in ordinary life. Something breaks open. For some people, it is sudden, a moment of overwhelming clarity, a sense that the world is more alive and more meaningful than it appeared to be seconds before. For others, it develops slowly, like a light that has been brightening so gradually that the moment you notice it, you cannot say when it began. But the experience always has, in her description, the character of a sudden consciousness of a living presence. Not an argument for that presence, a contact. Julian of Norwich, in 14th century England, received a series of what she called her showings while she lay near death at the age of 30. She recovered. She spent the next 20 years in a small cell attached to a church in Norwich, thinking about what she had been shown and writing it down with extraordinary precision. The awakening does not always look peaceful. Sometimes it looks like a crisis. Sometimes it arrives as illness or loss or the particular kind of despair that has no name. Whatever form it takes, it changes the direction of a person's life. The purgation begins when the person who has awakened realizes that their ordinary habits of mind, ordinary self-concern, ordinary distraction, ordinary attachment to comfort and approval, are now visible as obstacles. This is not self-punishment. Underhill is clear and almost emphatic about this. The purgative life is not about hating the body or flagellating the will. It is about redirecting attention away from the noise of self-concern and towards something more permanent. The practical form this takes, across traditions, is almost always the same: silence, some form of contemplative practice, a deliberate loosening of the grip on the small self and its constant narration. The Desert Fathers of Egypt in the 3rd and 4th centuries called it apatheia, not indifference, but the quieting of compulsive reaction so that something else could be heard. Here is the emotional truth of this stage. The person in purgation is not miserable. They are often more alive than they have ever been, but they are also more honest. They can see now what their habitual patterns actually cost them, the energy spent defending a self-image, the dullness that comes from living on the surface of experience. And they find, this is Underhill's observation, drawn from hundreds of sources, that the more they let go, the less they lose. Illumination is the longest stage for most mystics, and it is also the stage most people mean when they talk about spiritual experience. There is a quality of light in this phase. Underhill uses that word deliberately because the mystics use it constantly across languages and centuries, and she takes the consistency seriously. The world appears transformed, not replaced, not escaped. The same world, seen differently, with a vividness that ordinary consciousness does not sustain. Richard Rolle, a 14th century English hermit who studied at Oxford and then left for the Yorkshire moors, described a sensation of actual physical warmth, a heat in his chest, that he initially suspected was physical illness. He examined the possibility carefully. It was not illness. It persisted for years. He wrote about it in a book called The Fire of Love, and he described it not as metaphor, but as something he physically felt, as reliably as hunger or cold. Underhill takes this seriously. She does not explain it away as neurological noise. She argues that the mystic in the illuminative phase is genuinely perceiving something that is there, a quality of reality, that ordinary consciousness, occupied with its endless practical management of the self, does not have the stillness to register. The practical takeaway from this section is not about having mystical experiences. It is about attention. What the illuminative mystics demonstrate is that the capacity for this kind of perception is not rare. It is not reserved for saints or the psychologically unusual. It is obstructed, and what obstructs it, in almost every account, is the same thing: the incessant noise of thinking about oneself. Then comes the stage that stops people: the dark night of the soul. The phrase comes from the Spanish Carmelite John of the Cross, who wrote a short poem about it in the 16th century and then spent years writing extended commentaries to explain what the poem actually meant. The dark night is not depression, though from the outside it can look identical. It is not a loss of faith in the ordinary sense. It is something more precise, and in a strange way, more purposeful. In the dark night, everything that previously supported the interior life goes quiet. The sense of presence that had become reliable, the warmth, the light, the clarity of the illuminative phase, simply stops. Prayer feels mechanical and hollow. The person prays anyway, and nothing comes back. The sense of God's nearness, which had been as steady as morning, vanishes. The mystic is left in an interior silence that feels at first exactly like abandonment. John of the Cross says it is not abandonment. It is the final surgery. The last attachments, even the attachment to spiritual consolation, even the quiet pleasure of feeling close to the divine, have to be removed because they are still, at bottom, attachments of the self. What is left when everything has been taken is what was always underneath. This is where most people on the contemplative path stop. They conclude that the experience has ended. They return to ordinary life and do not speak of it much. Underhill's argument is that the stopping is the threshold. The dark night is not the death of the path. It is the door. Union is what Underhill calls the unitive life, and she is careful to say it is not the same as annihilation. The mystic does not cease to be a person. Teresa of Avila ran a major reform movement within the Carmelite order for decades after her deepest mystical experiences. She founded 17 convents. She traveled, negotiated, argued with bishops, wrote administrative letters that still survive, and produced 2 of the most detailed accounts of interior development in the Western tradition: The Interior Castle and The Life. She was also, by her own careful account, someone who had undergone a permanent interior transformation that she could not fully describe, but also could not deny. What changes in union is not the person's name or their work or their relationships. What changes is the relationship between the self and the whole. The hard boundary between what is inside and what is outside. The boundary that feels, in ordinary life, as solid as bone, becomes transparent. Underhill quotes Meister Eckhart at this point. He says, "The eye through which I see God is the same eye through which God sees me." She does not offer that as a decoration. She offers it as a precise description of the structure of awareness at the end of the path. The seer and the seen are not, in the end, 2 different things. There was a woman who never left her comfortable London house, and yet spent her life mapping the most interior territory in human experience. Evelyn Underhill died in 1941. She had not, as far as anyone can tell, completed the full path she described with such care. But she had read every account that survived, and she had noticed what the accounts had in common, and she had written it down with enough precision that a person lying in the dark tonight could follow the thread. The question she leaves is not whether you believe any of this. The question is whether there is something in your own ordinary experience, some moment of unexpected stillness, some second when the world suddenly felt more real than usual, that you have not yet taken seriously enough to follow. If something in this summary stayed with you, drop it in the comments, and a like helps more than you know.